Many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
To Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. We're going to dive into a little foreign news to start the broadcast off. But we're going to cover a lot of domestic issues. One that the Supreme Court is considering, that kind of really, you kind of have to get down into a little bit more details with it, and that's, can cops arrest you for going to a party where you don't know the host? So there's a lot more to that than just that title, but we will get into that one. Second here. We have some on the Justice Department's calls for responsible encryption. I definitely want to get into that one. But to kind of start off, we heard Trump come out saying he's not going to basically certify Iran's compliance. He's basically going against all the advisors, cabinet members, and even international bodies. And I'm not a big fan of the Iranian government. I think there is some radical beliefs. And, you know, who do you really trust? I think that it's really hard to tell who to trust in this. Does Trump have access and know things we don't? You know, the problem is, you know, how much does this help our cause? And when I say cause, I'm thinking, you know, peaceful resolutions to issues. It seems like the neocons are definitely whispering in the president's ears and getting their agenda pushed to a point. But I want to get in this Ron Paul Liberty Report covering this, and we'll get a little bit more in depth into it after this.
everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you, sir?
I am doing well. I wish the country was doing as well as I feel.
Good.
But we want to talk about one of the defects in the policies of our administration, having to do with foreign policy. And the big news really over the weekend, or as the weekend was breaking, was what did Trump finally do about Iran? Would he decertify? Would he certify? Well, he figured it out. He would decide to do neither.
Yeah.
He sort of put it into limbo. Oh, good, let Congress sort all this out. But he's pretty explicit on his position. And like we've said in the past, he flip-flops a lot. But he hasn't been really a flip-flopper on Iran. He said he's just really taken a position which fits into the position of the neocons and other special interest groups that Iran is they're bad actors and they have to deal with them. And he's sticking to that principle. But right now, even his own staff are getting concerned about the warmongering policies that he has. You know, this idea of not certifying is significant. It's challenged an agreement that was made a year or so ago that really we thought was moving in the right direction. Exactly how it came about, there might be some questions, but it at least moved an agreement to the point where we were going to talk to the Iranians, and everybody agrees, I think including the president, that they haven't broken their agreement. They still did not do anything that should justify decertification. And his generals have agreed with backing off a little bit, and they might have modified his position. Maybe he was ready to decertify, that's his language. But his staff was scurrying around to say, is there something else that we can do that we can stall this for a while? And that's where we are. It's sort of going back to the Congress. Now, Congress, you'll see AIPAC and the neocons and all the warmongers. They're going to line up, and they were able to get almost anything they ever wanted in the Congress. So who knows? Even though there's people who are seriously challenging this, some who even were opposed to the treaty, they just would like to keep their hands off. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But one thing I want to talk a little bit about, and you've looked into this a bit, is the misinformation. How many things are being said by the administration and Trump himself. It's just misleading. Sometimes if I accidentally pick up a news show on a rare television, I want to just say, that's not true. That's not true. There's so much deceit. And he says it with such authority. Sometimes I think he may even believe that.
Well, he was in a bind because he could not find Iran in non-compliance because of the simple fact that they are in compliance. The IAEA has agreed that they've been in compliance since the deal was concluded. All of our allies and partners internationally agree that they have been in complete compliance. This is an objective thing. There's not wiggle room. They either did this or they didn't. And thus far, they're in compliance. So what he did is he found some wiggle room in the legislation that Congress passed to approve then President Obama's accession to this agreement. And that wiggle room was a clause giving the president authority to determine whether the sanctions regime was appropriate and proportionate. And so he took that little bit out. And that's essentially what he did. He didn't abrogate it. As you said, he didn't do any of these things technically because he couldn't. He took a little wiggle room and says it's not in our interest, and they're awfully bad people.
Right, and there's been pretty strong reports, things we've been very much aware of, that one of his closest advisors on this issue is Nikki Haley. And he loves her. He said, of course, she has a good podium at the United Nations, and you hear a lot about it. And the interesting conflict between Tillerson and Trump is that why does Tillerson put up with this? All the insults that Trump throws out at him, and they have some disagreement. And Tillerson comes across as a more reasonable person. But we also know that Haley would like to have his job, and Trump would probably appoint her. But he's not going to fire Tillerson, but he's trying to, my guess is that he might be just trying to get him to resign. But if somebody wonders about Haley, because she hasn't been known. She's governor of South Carolina. She's not known in the circles, on international affairs, but she has a teacher, a very important teacher. The person that she looks up to, his name happens to be John Bolton. So that should perk up everybody's ears if they want to think about how do you avoid war? Why should war be a first option? And think about the Iraq war. And all of a sudden, this is where he's getting his advice now, is how do you stir up another battle like Iraq and confront the Iranians because they're such bad people, according to Trump?
I'm convinced that if you got close enough to Nikki Haley and pulled off her mask, you'd see John Bolton, that it's him. And this is the same John Bolton who said the Iraqi people are much better off now than they were under Saddam Hussein. With 1 million dead, a country in total turmoil, a 13-year, 14-year war. This is what he believes. He was one of the prime suspects of lying us into the war. Everything he said was a lie about Iraq, promising how great it would be. And somehow he's not discredited. I love this line in your column for today. I mean, essentially, don't these people have any shame? When they do something so horrible. And so you're right. Nikki Haley has no experience. She's not a foreign policy person, but she has somebody whispering in her ear, and then she's whispering into Trump's ear, and this is what they're saying. It's the same warmed-over neocon stuff that they've been saying about Iran for 10 or 15 years, all disproven in the 2007 NIE, the intelligence community's assessment of Iran, all disproven, but they continue it.
This principle of not having any shame is a characteristic of a sociopath.
Yeah.
And one time somebody has suggested so-and-so was, I think he was using the term against Hillary. She's a sociopath. She has no shame. Then I got to thinking about it, that anybody that's in a position of reasonable leadership in Washington, they all have this tendency to be sociopathic. They never, whether it's economic policy or foreign policy, if it does a lot of harm, it's rationalized away. Well, we had to mismanage and this happened, unintended consequences. It was his fault. It was a partisan thing. The Congress wouldn't help us, but they have no shame. And that's why this doesn't bother them. They don't look and say, well, this might go in the opposite direction and maybe it will backfire on us. They just bulldoze ahead. And unfortunately, Bolton is a very, very influential person right now. So I think this policy is not going to change. It'll be interesting to see how the House and the Senate handles this, because I think it looks like some votes would need 60% of the vote in the Senate, and others would be a majority vote. But I don't think it's going to be smooth sailing, because there are so many disagreements. But then I also look at who really has the influence in the Congress. Who are the lobbyists? And AIPAC is a powerful lobbyist, and they have something to say about it. And then you have people like Rubio. He's sort of in opposition to some of the hawkish congressmen like McCain and Graham, because they want to fix it to their agreement, move it in that direction. And Rubio says, absolutely not. We have to destroy this. He wants to get rid of it. And that's his goal. So he and Nikki Haley, they're probably the two closest, most radical neoconservatives there are.
And let's look at how the American people view the neocons, because John Bolton was toying with the idea of running for president last time. He bought a lot of ads on Twitter, touting himself as a great expert, and he was literally laughed out of polite society. He's routinely despised. He's thought of as one of the worst. Same with, look what happened to Lindsey Graham when he actually ran for president. Maybe 3 people voted for him, and one of them was probably his own mother. I mean, these ideas are super unpopular. They can't be elected. But somehow when someone like Trump is elected, they just wean their way in, and they weasel their way in. Here they are again.
Another thing that they throw out there just to convince everybody that how bad the Iranian people are, and they do have their problems, and we don't defend them for that. We just try to talk about our policy. But, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, it's big. It has influence. They have 125,000, but they paint them as if they run the Middle East, and that they are the monster. But just for instance, how would you compare the ability of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard to influence world politics compared to our CIA and our special forces.
Yeah, it's not even essentially, in the same ballpark. And essentially, the Revolutionary Guards, it sounds scary, and they like to say that word, but essentially what the Revolutionary Guard is the special forces of the Iranian army. It's their special forces. And yes, they're active in Syria, they're fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they were invited by the legitimate Syrian government, unlike the U.S.
And I think it was started, if I'm correct, it was after the Iranian Revolution, and they threw out the Shah, and they had to have somebody protecting their religious leaders because they thought, well, what did the CIA do in 1953? Is it possible that the CIA is still around, or have they been extinguished in the United States? Oh, no, they're still around. So, in a way, it was a defensive mechanism because it started, just as a religious protection of their leaders. But obviously, they are involved in their geographic closeness to these other countries where, it involves them, and it also involves legitimate invitation by governments in control in there. That is a little bit different than we decide to build bases in different places of the world, or we decide, well, Assad has to go, and we would actually send over assistance to some of the radicals, the good radicals, not the bad radicals,
that's right.
The moderates, and give them monies and weapons to do their bidding. So that is a little bit different. But and you mentioned it in the opening that there's been a lot of lies told, and empires do have to lie in order to justify, because quite frankly, as important as we think this is and how obvious we think the facts are, we probably wouldn't win a popularity contest if you went out on the street. First thing is somebody would say, where is this place you're talking about?
Yeah.
They wouldn't know or care. But other ones would be pretty convinced that, what they hear on television, that these people are monsters. And how about the money? Most people, most Americans would believe that we took money from American taxpayers and sent it over there, but that isn't exactly what happened.
And even Trump even mentioned this in his speech, that crazy Obama, he sent, carton loads, boatloads of money over. He flew over and dropped it over to them as if we somehow paid them off for the deal. But the fact of the matter is, whatever you think about Iran, that money, all or at least part of it, was money that they put down to buy U.S. fighter jets before 1979. So they paid up front all these millions of dollars. The revolution happened, and the U.S. said, hey, we're not going to give you your deposit back. And that money's been sitting there since 79. And so as part of this deal, as part of a negotiation of diplomacy, give and take, part of it was giving their money back.
I often wonder about how much they believe themselves. Like the president says it all the time, but I just wonder whether it ever crossed his mind that, you're really not accurate in what you're saying. And we get no help from the media. The media, would they ever ask the question?
No.
At a press conference and put person on the spot? But this is what always bothers me is this march to war is bipartisan. There's no philosophic differences. There'll be some bickering to try to get one up on the other party, but policies don't change very often. And let's just hope that this isn't a dramatic, acceleration that it could be, and who knows what will happen in 60 days. That means by the end of the year, we may know something different, and we're going to hear a lot about it, but it could be a very dangerous move.
Yeah, and we both read a piece by Paul Pillar, who had spoke at a couple of the lunches back on the Hill, a friend of ours. He was in the CIA under President Bush and before, and an expert in the Middle East, but he did a very good piece in the National Interest where he just took apart some of what President Trump said in the speech that was just simply wrong. The heavy water issue, for example, the idea that they violated the treaty because they're heavy water. Well, when their stores of heavy water ran up to the limit, they did exactly what the agreement called for. They sold some, they got rid of it, and they brought it back down. The other issue, they intimidated international inspectors. They gave not a shred of evidence that they have ever done that. No one has ever said that. But remember when Scott Ritter spoke at our conference last month, he said this is exactly what they're going to do. They're going to make it harder and harder for the inspectors because they're going to push Iran, and then as soon as Iran lets out a pip, they're going to say, There you go, because that's exactly what they did in Iraq.
Well, Trump accused them of being allies with Al Qaeda, and remember that's similar to what they did in Iraq.
Yeah.
Remember,
they did 9/11.
After 9/11, they were responsible for 9/11, and the American people believed it, and that they had nuclear weapons. It's all over and over again. So it's not a happy situation, to say the least.
No, and it's rife with error. The fake assertion that Iran was ready to collapse when Obama rescued it by giving them all this aid. The whole speech was just peppered with lies. But I do like one thing that Paul Pillar said about this, because one of the rationale that Trump uses and Trump's people use to pull out is that, some of these provisions restricting Iran are going to sunset in 10 or 20 years. And so let's pull out so they sunset now. But Pillar made a good point, that getting out of the agreement because of the restrictions on Iran will sunset is like committing suicide because you're afraid of death.
Well, it's not very logical, but they don't brag about their logic. They brag about how brilliant they are, and they're going to take care of us and keep peace in the world. But it's also interesting about how some of these agreements come up and what might have happened if the non-interventionists were in charge way back. I can't see non-interventionists getting so deeply involved. Then again, what do you do when it's all messy and you're trying to extricate ourselves? One thing that they did on NAFTA, when they wanted NAFTA passed, they didn't do a treaty. And that was a treaty. It should have been, supported by 2/3 of the Senate, but it never did that. Now they have this mess, and you do have to work within the international community in order to try to get out. And of course, the way the Constitution is written, that these agreements should be more bilateral, and the Congress should initiate trade agreements and all these other things. But right now it looks messy. But we have oftentimes complimented the previous administration for moving in the right direction. And this brings up the subject of those other countries who agreed with this, the P5 plus Germany. And you hear two stories right now. One is that they are really hacked off and they don't like it. They like the agreement and they don't like what Trump is doing. And others would say, but when push comes to shove, the Europeans are just going to do what we tell them to do. We are the economic and the military power of the world. And I think that is yet to be settled because, in the midst of a severe downturn and a challenge to the dollar, maybe the Europeans wouldn't give us an inch. But even under these circumstances, it might be up for discussion. Maybe the Europeans aren't going to roll over and they're going to say, all right, you go your way, do what you want, but we're trading. And evidently Germany is the country that has most at stake in trade with Iran.
And the Europeans immediately released a statement after President Trump's speech condemning what he's saying. So I think they're trying to play tough, but I think it is a good question. Will they roll over? As we've mentioned on this show several times, trade between Iran and the EU has been up 79% since the agreement, so they're making money. My last, statement would be that what Trump is doing is he's also hurting the United States. Iran is desperate to buy a bunch of planes from us. That's a lot of good-paying jobs, all gone if he continues this way. So I do want to remind everyone again about Dr. Paul's new book and how you can get your personalized copy of Dr. Paul's new book. And I'm doing this every day or every other day at least because we only have through October to get your copy. And a matter of fact, we got to get some more copies ordered because people are responding in a big time. So get your copy quick.
Sounds good. Looks like there are a few people out there that still believe in non-intervention. And Daniel, you're right about this being detrimental, what Trump is doing to the United States. But the bigger picture is what is happening right now and the way we get involved in war is a detriment to peace. And that, of course, is one of the major goals of this program, is to try to explain to people why non-interventionism is the best way to work toward peace and prosperity. And as long as we are able to do this, and as long as nobody closes down our website, we're going to keep talking about the best way to achieve peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out. Subscribe. Now, I wasn't a fan of this treaty with Iran, and I don't know if I haven't confirmed if it was taken out, but there was, at least at one point, an attempt to have where American inspectors couldn't come in. I don't know if that was removed. But the problem is we're putting ourselves out there in a posture that doesn't help with the circumstances that we have already put ourselves in all these foreign relations, definitely in the Middle East. So I think that if we could have at least agreement to disagree, but be peaceful, I think working to that is a better option. Doesn't mean that you don't, strategically plan for defense against something, but it doesn't mean that you degrade or, try to posture up when it's not needed. And I think that's what this is. I think that's Trump's kind of, his whole going at any issue is to posture up. And I don't believe that's going to help us out. Definitely with how much we are spread out. I have one here from the Libertarian Republic. Counterpoint: no, Trump can't bomb North Korea without Congress or the UN. 2 months ago today, our sister site Liberty Viral published a piece entitled "To Bomb North Korea, Trump Doesn't Need Congress or the UN." It was written by a squiggly line guy who I respect despite his name and whom I agree with on most issues. This isn't one of them. The basis for his article relies on one major assumption: that the U.S. is already at war with Korea, because the Korean War never actually ended. Instead, the 1953 Korean Armistice Agreement was merely a ceasefire between North and South Korea rather than a peace treaty. From the peace, we are already at war with North Korea. This isn't a recent development. On the contrary, we've been at war with North Korea for a while, for well over half a century, since 1950 to be exact. Given that the Korean War is still ongoing, the article argues Trump needs no approval from either Congress or the UN. I agree with the assessment that the Korean War is technically merely on pause. I disagree that America was ever constitutionally at war with North Korea, or that it ever even claimed to be. Under our Constitution, declarations of war are to come from Congress, not the President. The most persuasive reason for vesting this power in the legislator's hands comes from James Madison in a letter to Jefferson. The Constitution supposes what The history of all governments demonstrates that the executive is the branch of power most interested in war and most prone to it. It has accordingly, with study care, bested the question of war to the legislator. The legislator has not passed a true declaration of war since World War II, and this includes the Korean conflict. From time to time, it has passed authorizations as well as the constitutionally dubious War Powers Act, allowing for greater yet still limited presidential discretion for assigning troops to conflicts without Congress. However, the War Powers Act was not signed until 20 years after the end of the hostilities in the Korean War. Truman didn't ask Congress for a declaration of war, and authorizations for war wasn't even yet in the political lexicon. What involvement did Congress then have in authorizing the conflict? Well, they appropriated $12 billion for use in the conflict without giving authorizations for U.S. troops to be involved. I assure you that money has already been spent. Given that there was no declaration of war, no authorization for war, and no vague interpretations of the War Powers Act to use as an excuse, what was Truman's excuse for participation in a war? Well, he claimed absurdly that it wasn't a war at all. No, it was a new Orwellian phrase he created just for the occasion. A police action. This term was new, at least for American conflicts. Through some colonial powers had used it to denote claims of sovereignty when suppressing local rebellions. The authority he claimed for this police action did not originate from the Constitution at all. After all, he never claimed that the Korean Peninsula was an American territory. No, the authority he spoke to was UN resolutions, which he believed granted America the right of enforcement in foreign lands. The assumption that we were ever constitutionally at war with Korea, even if Korea had been at war with itself, is therefore false for several reasons. One, Congress never declared war to Truman. When committing acts of war, claimed he was only executing a police action rather than war. 3, the authority he claimed for his right to commit such action was the UN, so even if one buys Truman's logic, it dictates UN approval for military action. In essence, Trump would need Congress for any war with Korea to be constitutional. He would need the UN to even pretend to follow Truman's logic about non-war war. And he's not going to receive either in any scenario short of DPRK attacking another nation first. But I still say that we watch presidents get involved in things that are new. Truman, perfect, example. We're police actions through the UN. Well, where does it stop? How many things are created that justify us, going against the Constitution? It's hard to believe it was 10 years ago. Outspoken about Ron Paul, and him running for president and his policies. And one of the big policies was if you're going to go to war, you have Congress declare war. You go in, you fight the war, and you come home. Policing the world is not our duty. So it's just amazing how different the world is right now, 10 years later. And that you have fascists and commies fighting each other, taking over the Democratic and the Republican Party. And you can't say they haven't taken over the Democratic Party because they were Bernie Sanders supporters. Some were Hillary supporters. A lot of those were in Hollywood because they support the Democratic nominee, basically. They're going to support whoever is the Democratic nominee. And that's basically what they did. But the far left, a lot were trying to push for Bernie Sanders. There were a lot of communists backing that. And when I say that, I'm talking not full-blown, expert communists. I'm talking about very young, inspired by fairy tales, pushed by career miseducators. And then you have the rise of the far right, the neo-Nazi nationalists and fascists. And if you look at the difference between our founding fathers, and not the miseducation about it, if you truly look at who our founding fathers were, the war they were fighting, and what they believed in, they were flawed, but they really truly had a moral goal for freedom. That was their goal. And a lot of them weren't atheists. They were Christian, but they still believed in the ability for free will. Again, they were flawed. Yes, some of them owned slaves, but Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. It was supposed to be, life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. But he purposely turned that into pursuit of happiness. And part of that reason was he knew that if he put property in there, that would put a ability for slave owners to argue that, look, their, slave is property. It's constitutionally protected. They worded things certain ways for a reason. Okay. I'm going to move along. Cover a little bit of this here. And this is over shocking FBI corruption. This from Stefan Molyneux. Actually, this one, True News. Stefan Molyneux on YouTube. And here we go.
Just a little bit clearer to those with eyes or ears why former FBI Director James Comey did not prosecute Hillary Clinton for her egregious misuse of classified information in the lead up to the 2016 presidential election. As it turns out, wild, breaking stuff today. Apparently, according to reports, the FBI uncovered Russian bribery of the Clintons in 2009. 2009! And the Department of Justice, as well as the FBI, kind of sat on this information for about 4 more years and then did not exactly cry its barbaric yawp from the rooftops in order to reveal its investigations. And this is part of a whole clusterfuck. Corruption orbiting the FBI like moon rocks around Saturn. Recently released documents show that James Comey exonerated Hillary Clinton before the extensive investigation into her email conduct had finished. Just astonishing. And I quote, Mr. Comey even circulated an early draft statement to select members of senior FBI leadership, according to Town Hall. See what that means? Investigation is not over. And Comey is there circulating a draft statement about how she's not guilty to FBI leadership. This is absolutely astounding. So the president of Judicial Watch, Tom Filton, said that Christopher Wray, he is the new FBI director who replaced James Comey after Trump fired him, defended the secrecy on this Russian dossier. You remember this Russian dossier about Trump being in a hotel room formerly occupied by the Obamas and having Russian prostitutes urinate on the bed, all kinds of crazy stuff. So the new FBI director defended the secrecy on this dossier, and the FBI has delayed providing information to Senate requests no fewer than 3 times. Obstruction of justice? You be the judge. Somebody has to. Judicial Watch has also recently caught the FBI actually hiding documents related to the Clinton-Lynch tarmac meeting. You know, the one where Lynch met with Bill Clinton and they talked about their grandchildren, apparently, while Lynch's DOJ was investigating Hillary Clinton. Well, the FBI said, well, there's no documents. They said, oh, well, we might have found some. Looky lad, checked under the couch. There we go. The head of the FBI overseeing the investigation into the Las Vegas shooting. It's a Comey appointee, and it is a unbelievable Keystone Cops on steroids clusterfuck of intergalactic incompetence. Did you know that the FBI met Las Vegas killer's girlfriend, Marilu Danley, at LAX and sneaked her out in a wheelchair? And they're releasing no pertinent information relative to this investigation. Just astonishing. Now, of course, as you know, after Trump was elected, he fired Comey as director of the FBI. So subsequent to that, Comey sat down to face a congressional hearing. And Comey stated under oath that he himself, James Comey, had actually leaked classified information to the press. Now that's a crime, according to my obviously amateur outside view. Leaking classified information to the press, I've seen people go to jail for much, much less. No, not going to start rapping. Oh, it'll come back one day, though, when you're least ready for it. A lot of scandals going on. That was happening. So when Mueller was FBI director, Mueller's in charge of the current endless probe into the Trump-Russia collusion to take the election and so on, which is basically just economically destroying a whole bunch of employees at the White House by causing them to raid their children's college funds in order to pay lawyers to fight off this investigation. But so Mueller really, really keen on investigating this Trump-Russia link, not quite as much keen on investigating other things when he was FBI director. And the FBI has a pretty wretched history these days. So if we go back to 2007, it was discovered that a bunch of top Bush administration officials used an RNC server to send and receive their emails, which violates the Presidential Records Act. And they did this while conducting official business, and afterwards, millions of these self-same emails, which must be preserved, were actually deleted. Yes, I'm not sure if it was BleachBit, but it was some kind of server wipe that occurred. 2010 to 2013, I've talked about this on this show before, there was the IRS targeting, with the IRS selecting and then delaying or denying this tax-exempt status from conservative groups. And this basically barred them or blocked them from participating in the 2012 election. And then Lois Lerner of the IRS invoked her Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. She has recently, well, nothing's going to happen to her, for reasons I think are pretty clear as we go forward. 2010, what was colloquially called the Fast and the Furious. So this was an alcohol, tobacco, and firearms programmed, pursued for reasons that escape me. And what this allowed was for over 2,000 guns to be purchased in the U.S. completely illegally. And then they were walked into Mexico and ended up in the hands of criminals. One of these weapons was used to murder border agent Brian Terry in 2010, and it was used by a member of a Mexican cartel. So government allowed guns to be bought, walked across the border, ended up being used by criminals to kill a border patrol guard. Not great. In 2012, the Department of Justice seized the communications of AP reporters, illegally, by the way. And these were communications that were sent back and forth during April and May of 2012. And this allowed the Department of Justice to figure out journalists' confidential sources, to unmask these confidential sources. Astonishing stuff. I mean, it doesn't sound that big a deal relative to the other stuff, but if sources don't have any guarantee of anonymity and confidentiality, then massive amounts of information are not going to make it to the public. The Clinton Foundation, 2009 to 2013. Now, this is during the time when, of course, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. The Clinton Foundation and Bill Clinton were paid in speaking fees and gifts from countries and so on. They were paid millions and millions of dollars. And they were given these gifts of millions of dollars with countries bound up in matters requiring State Department approval. Now, of course, some of these countries, ties to terrorism, massive human rights abuses, and seems to be some pretty significant evidence that the funds that were supposed to go to the Clinton Foundation seemed to have been hived off and diverted to slightly less charitable causes, such as, the wedding of Chelsea Clinton in 2010. Talked about this before, the Russian uranium deal. This spans from 2009 to 2013. So the State Department, under Hillary Clinton, approved a deal that allowed a Russian company to end up controlling 1/5 of America's uranium mining production capacity. Now, after this company gained control of 20% of America's uranium mining production capacity, well, wouldn't you know, millions of dollars flowed in donations to the Clinton Foundation from just about everyone and their dog associated with the transaction. 2009 to 2013, talked about this again before, just a reminder, a briefer. Clinton's handling of confidential information during her entire tenure as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton found a way to sidestep the Freedom of Information Act by using a private email server set up in her toilet and her barn to conduct all of this official government business. And sent and received classified information, top secret and above sometimes, over a non-secure system, which was described as extremely reckless and seems to be obviously illegal. So Mueller didn't pursue the actual law in a lot of these cases, and there is this perception, which I've talked about before, that the system of law in the United States has turned into this very strange net, you see. The net which catches little fish but lets the big fish swim free. So there are laws for the political elite, not just on the left, but also on the right, as we talked about with the Bush email scandals from 2007. Laws for those who have a lot of political power and a lot of political pull. The aristocracy of pull, as Rand used to say. Those are the laws, or the lack of laws, and then there are the laws for everyone else. So, do you have some understanding as to why the political elites on both the left and the right did not want Trump to get in? When he talked about draining the swamp, he was talking about draining the swamp where they buried the bodies. You understand? Once you've got the body and the cause of death, then all you have to do is establish motive, means, and opportunity, and you can get yourself a conviction. But it is a hell of a thing to do to expose this level and depth of corruption. So, with that wee bit of backstory, let's turn to what came out just now. So, 2010, the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton's State Department approved this deal, which gave Moscow control of 20% of American uranium. So, before that approval occurred, the FBI had gathered together detailed and substantial evidence that Russian nuclear industry officials were bribing, were offering kickbacks, were extorting people, and laundering money. Why? Well, Putin wanted to grow his atomic energy business, especially inside the United States. And this level of detail was absolutely astonishing. So there was a confidential U.S. witness who worked deep within the Russian nuclear industry. He gathered financial records, he was wired and made secret recordings and intercepted emails. This is all the way back to 2009. And the reveal was that Moscow had infiltrated and compromised an American trucking company. It doesn't sound that important, but it was a trucking company that ended up being responsible for transporting all this uranium around. It's a big security issue. So Russia had infiltrated and compromised this trucking company, it bribes and kickbacks and so on, and this was in clear violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. This is according to court documents, FBI documents, fairly incontrovertible. The FBI also had an eyewitness account, and this was thoroughly backed up by documents, which showed that the nuclear officials from Russia had routed millions of dollars designed to benefit former President Bill Clinton's charitable foundation. All of this during the time that Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. And that, of course, the State Department provided the decision the Russians wanted to end up with the Russians being able to control all of this uranium. Absolutely wild stuff. Now, according to documents, this shakedown, these bribes, this money laundering, all of this racketeering stuff was conducted, and I quote, with the consent of higher level officials, end quote, Russian officials, who, quote, shared the proceeds, end quote, from these kickbacks. This is according to an affidavit from an agent years later. So, this is all known. This is all known. Now, enough information seems to have been gathered by 2010 to bring charges. Didn't happen. Did not happen. Ooh, you see, everybody's so concerned about Russian interference. 2010, they had them by the short and curlies. The Department of Justice just continued to investigate and investigate and gather and investigate for how long? 4 more years. Which means that, of course, the American voters and Congress didn't know about all of this corruption flowing from Russia's desire to control American uranium. Now, there were 2 major decisions regarding all of this stuff that was made while Congress and the American public was largely in the dark about the corruption that had been uncovered. The first decision, this is October of 2010, the State Department and the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States unanimously approved, a partial sale of a Canadian mining company, which was called Uranium One, to this Russian nuclear agency, Rosatom, which again gave Moscow control over, actually it was more than 20% of America's uranium. Now, this was reported on and repeated by Trump and a lot of other people, myself included, during the campaign season in 2016. And Hillary Clinton's spokesman said that, oh no, Hillary Clinton was not involved at the committee review, and said that the State Department official who handled it said she, quote, never intervened, end quote, on any Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States matter. Just astonishing, astonishing stuff. Well, I guess not that astonishing. So, according to a person who worked on the case, here's a quote. The Russians were compromising American contractors in the nuclear industry with kickbacks and extortion threats, all of which raised legitimate national security concerns. And none of that evidence got aired before the Obama administration made those decisions. Now, this is according to someone who spoke to The Hill, but spoke on condition of anonymity for clear and obvious reasons of fear of not only the Americans, but also the Russians. So this whole investigation, who was ultimately in charge of it? So there was a U.S. attorney named Rod Rosenstein. Now, he was an Obama appointee, and now he is President Trump's deputy attorney general. Who else? Well, the assistant FBI director at the time, Andrew McCabe, who's now the deputy FBI director under Trump. So both of these men are key and central into the investigation / witch hunt / cover-up, in my opinion, into this collusion between Russia and Donald Trump's campaign during the 2016 election cycle. So McCabe is under Congressional and Justice Department Inspector General investigation. Why? Well, his wife's Virginia State Senate campaign accepted, this is back in 2015, accepted from now Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe a lot of money to pursue her campaign at a time when McAuliffe was reportedly under investigation by the FBI. So this current Russia collusion case, well, there's a lot of connections to what's been going on before. So the probe, one of the probes began in 2009 when Robert Mueller was still FBI director. Now he's the special counsel in charge of the Trump case. And this investigation ended in late 2015. That's under the direction of James Comey, who then was, of course, FBI director, the one who Trump fired earlier this year. So Uranium One, remember, was sold to the Russian mega corporation or mega entity regarding nuclear power. So there were 9 shareholders in Uranium One. Uranium One needed approval from Hillary's State Department in order to complete this transaction because, of course, uranium is such a sensitive substance. So the nine shareholders in Uranium One, those 9 shareholders, well, funny story, not funny story, they ended up providing more than $145 million in donations to the Clinton Foundation before the State Department approved of the sale. Just astounding. So the Clintons, or the Clinton Foundation, took close to $150 million from these Uranium One officials. And then the deal was approved by Hillary Clinton's State Department. Now, the Clintons did not report these donations. And there was a memorandum of understanding that Hillary Clinton signed with the Obama administration when she became Secretary of State. And she said, she promised, she said, I pinky swear that I'm going to disclose to everyone publicly all donations received during the time that she was Secretary of State. Well, who hasn't had a day when they've conveniently forgot to report almost $150 million in money, which you're supposed to report, because it might reveal potential conflict of interest? Now, Senator John Barrasso, the Republican from Wyoming, told Greta Van Susteren that the deal Hillary approved of, which essentially gave Putin control and ownership of over 20% of U.S. uranium, is important for a number of reasons, but also, perhaps most important, is that Russia sells uranium to countries not entirely aligned with the United States' interests, to put it as nicely as humanly possible, including Iran. Iran. So what the hell is going on? But this is what I see from the outside. It's not proven. This is just what I see. Just about everyone who was implicated in this Russian corruption case, like the one back in 2009 and onwards, all the people who were implicated in failing to notify, failing to pursue, failing to prosecute, failing to tell Congress, the American people, all of the people involved in that are now in key positions in the investigation of the Trump-Russia collusion. Do you see how this works? Once Trump got in, the fear, I assume, that Trump's DOJ under Sessions was going to find out about this and was going to try and figure out what was going on. It's a kill or be killed situation here. Either you bleed people dry and drive them from office with endless investigations, or they're going to start looking into what happened under your watch, not 8 years ago. So this Trump-Russia hoax, so many times among Democrats, among leftists, so many times, almost it's become a law of gravity. Whatever they're accusing you of, they're the ones actually doing it. It's what gives such peculiar energy and persistence to this mania. So this Trump-Russia, ooga booga, scare story, what? Well, there was real Russian collusion. The Clinton Foundation, Uranium One. And a lot of administrators in the Obama administration, worked on, helped, oversaw, or covered up the facilitation of this deal. Is there any objectivity in the investigation of President Trump? What happens if these former heads of agencies end up being investigated themselves? What happens? Is there any objectivity or rule of law or morality left in the republic at all? And where the hell is the mainstream media in the reporting of this? This wasn't unknown. It was reported on, but very low on the radar. So the mainstream media, dereliction of duty when it comes to the one thing that they're supposed to do, which is to hold up the mirror and the light to those in power. Speak truth to power. Or, as the saying goes, democracy dies in darkness. Yes, but you're not supposed to be turning off the lights so the murder can be more efficient, mainstream media. And this is where things stand. Look at the amount of energy, time, ferocity that is being poured into the Trump-Russia collusion. Why? Because I believe if the truth comes out, Democrats and their lackeys and those in power are revealed as who and what they are for all time. And that is an eventuality that tens of millions of people in America desperately do not want. They need the leftist narrative to continue because of their dependence on state power. And I'm not just talking about the poor, I'm talking about the entire military-industrial complex. This is late empire stuff. This is banana republic stuff. This stuff needs to be exposed and dealt with. And anybody who's not out there talking about this is part of what keeps the eyes of the republic averted from the real swamp creatures inhabiting its innards. Let's turn on the light. Let's see what's there. And let's not stop.
Stefan Molyneux on YouTube. Check him out. Subscribe. Now, I have an article here. Let me pull it back up. This one from USA Today. Congress is spending millions on Russia investigations, but you'll probably never know exactly how much. Senate Intelligence Chairman Richard Burr and Vice Chairman Mark Warner hold a news conference on the status of the committee's inquiry into Russia interference in the 2016 election at the U.S. Capitol on October 4th, 2017. Congress is spending millions of dollars on investigations of Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election, but it's impossible to tell from public reports exactly how much the probes are costing taxpayers, and the committees running the investigation refuse to talk about it. The Senate Intelligence Committee received an extra $1.2 million earlier this year for its investigation and added 2 employees to help its existing staff with the Russia probes. According to a congressional aide who is not authorized to speak about the subject publicly, the House Intelligence Committee also added 2 new lawyers with a combined annual salary of $290,000, expense reports show. The congressional investigations are only a portion of the cost to taxpayers of the ongoing Russia saga. Special counsel Robert Mueller is running a criminal investigation out of the Justice Department for which there is little public accounting of the costs, and there is no telling how much the White House legal office is spending to respond to inquiries arising from investigations. Congress did not create a special committee for the Russia investigation like it did for the House Select Committee on Benghazi, which spent and disclosed in routine accounting reports nearly $7 million from 2014 to 2016, investigating the 2012 killing of the U.S. ambassador and 3 other Americans at the U.S. compound in Libya. Spending by special committee is much easier to track because their entire budget supports a single investigation. In contrast, the congressional committees conducting Russia probes are existing panels with sweeping responsibilities and expenses unrelated to Russia. Monthly expense reports filed by the House Intelligence Committee show that it has spent more than $3.1 million through August of this year on salaries, travel, equipment, and other expenses. That is up nearly $600,000 from the same period a year ago, and up more than $800,000 over the same period in 2015. The committee would not provide an estimate of how much that budget is being consumed by the Russia probe. Attorneys who have worked on congressional investigations in the past estimate the House and Senate Intelligence Committees are spending between 20% and 50% of their time on the Russia investigations. Quote, I would say that up to 20% of their time is spent on the Russia investigation, said Charles Teffier, Tyranny, who served as general counsel to the U.S. House of Representatives from 84 to 95 and was special deputy chief counsel for the House Iran-Contra Committee's investigation of the Reagan administration. When you work with the staff of the House Intelligence Committee, you're struck by the vast scale of their responsibility. And you can read the rest of that at USA Today and look at more, expense, estimates. But really, when you look at what Mueller's doing, he's using, potential other, crimes or, accusations of these crimes to try to go after all these people surrounding Trump. And it really does seem like, trying to, pinch off people within the administration that won't go along with what the powers behind the scenes want. And I think Trump's, he's really fighting, how's he going to respond to things. And I think that's why he says some of the outrageous stuff he does, because I think he's putting them in a pinch. Now what are you going to do? So it's hard telling what's really going on in this investigation, how much it's costing us. But we know that there are legitimate, concerns related to Russia, again, with the Clinton Foundation. That should be investigated. But it seems like they're chasing ghosts. There's no, here's evidence. It's still chasing this ghost. And it really seems to be illegitimate at this point. I'm going to try to pull up this clip. Judge Andrew Napolitano, if I can get it. Okay. This says Judge says Jeff Sessions needs his own private attorney. And I really want to get into this. See if it pops off here.
Jeff Sessions tongue-tied, or can he get an answer?
Real quickly, you and I, while it was going on, I said, does he need personal counsel? And you said,
yes.
Why?
Because I think he needs an unbiased, non-Justice Department, bright legal mind to help him sift through some of these things. It wouldn't be unusual, but it wouldn't be unprecedented.
It continues, and we will dip in and out as it makes news, obviously. President Trump, meanwhile, is tweeting that new documents show fired FBI Director James Comey, one of the topics at that hearing today, quote,
And of course, they cut it right there. Says here, Jeff Sessions needs to hire a private attorney from outside the Department of Justice to help his legal battles. Judge Andrew Napolitano said Wednesday on Fox News, outnumbered in light of Sessions' testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Napolitano was asked if the Attorney General should retain private counsel. I think he needs an unbiased, non-justice department, bright legal mind to help him sift through some of these things. Napolitano responded, it wouldn't be unprecedented. Napolitano thinks that Sessions is getting boxed in by repeated legal inquiries and said the Attorney General is close to committing a crime by misleading Congress. The Attorney General, quote, the Attorney General is in a little bit of a box. He's already the Attorney General. He doesn't need their approval to stay in office, but he knows he's sworn to tell the truth. He also knows he cannot mislead them, Napolitano said. So sometimes telling a sterile, brief truth can leave a misleading interpretation in the mind of the questionnaire. That is an independent crime, he added. Misleading Congress, and he can't do that. And if he has a job to do, what's this? How is this affecting his job? And you think he stepped aside from the Russia investigation, saying, I was appointed by Trump, step away, special, investigation, and that should, take care of any issues. Nope. Again, it seems like they're just going after everybody that Trump appoints or surrounds himself with. And it almost has become an assault on, his administration. Because we should have some type of evidence or something that has come out by now saying that there's, definitely evidence that would suggest something. Instead, we get news stories about who, they're harassing or going after for how long. And it becomes so drawn out that it really seems like they're grasping for anything. Okay. If I got time, I'll cover this. Where are we? Oh, yeah, we got time. Okay. First, I want to cover this one from Reason.com. Supreme Court considers, can cops arrest you for going to a party where you don't know the host? Quote, 21 people en masse arrested for trespassing for going to a party. Does that feel right? Asked Supreme Court Justice Nia Sotomayor in a case that sees District of Columbia cops on the hook for false arrest. Neither Sotomayor nor her Supreme Court of the United States colleagues seem impressed with the city's contention that guests at a 2008 D.C. house party should have known they were trespassing. The guests had been invited there for a bachelor shindig, directly or secondhand by a woman named Peaches, and they had little reason to suspect she was lying about having recently rented the house. You're saying that anytime a policeman goes into a house and there's a party and people tell you somebody invited me, and it turns out that somebody didn't have a right to be in the house, you can arrest the invited guests. Justice Stephen Breyer asked the city's attorney during an oral argument last Wednesday. When invited to a party at someone's home, I don't ask to look at their lease, said Sotomayor. I don't ask for them to establish to my satisfaction or anyone else's their right to be there. I assume if they're there, they can invite me in. It might seem silly that the Supreme Court is discussing a rogue bachelor party, but the case should have big implications for police accountability. The Supreme Court should not further expand the doctrine of qualified immunity in the context of the Fourth Amendment probable cause requirement, argues the American Civil Liberties Union. That would weaken America's ability to hold government officers accountable for their unconstitutional actions and would diverge from the principles undergirding the framers' intent in drafting the Fourth Amendment prohibition on unreasonable seizures. Yale Law School filed a brief supporting the partygoers. Party at Peaches. Upon being called to the house by a complaint from neighbors, D.C. police heard loud music playing inside and saw a man look out the window, then run upstairs. When they knocked, according to the city's summary of the case, police claimed the door was ajar, and when they entered, there was a strong odor of marijuana, and women were in their undergarments with money hanging out from their garter belts. Some people were standing around drinking, some were getting lap dances. Police eventually determined that this was a party thrown by Peaches, who had hired the dancers, invited some guests who invited guests of their own as well, and recently stepped out to go to the store. But while Peaches was in negotiations with the house's owner to rent the place, and may have even had keys, she had never actually sealed the deal on the lease and did not have permission to throw a party there, all things she admitted to the police when they called her from the party. Peaches did not implicate her guests in the scheme, and they claimed that they didn't know of her deception, or in some cases didn't know who lived at the house, but had no reason to suspect they were trespassing. Still, all 21 people at the house were arrested for unlawful entry and taken to the police station, where they were detained for several more hours. All 21 would be back or booked for disorderly conduct. Through those charges were eventually dropped. The group filed a lawsuit seeking damages from the city and the arresting officers, alleging false arrests and violation of their Fourth Amendment rights. A district court sided with the partygoers, finding that D.C. police lacked probable cause to arrest them for unlawful entry. Nothing about what the police learned at the scene suggests that partygoers knew or should have known that they were entering against the owner's will, wrote the court. A jury awarded each responded $35,000 to $50,000, with the city and officers Andre Parker and Anthony Campanelli jointly liable for the total $680,000 tab. The city appealed in January. The Supreme Court agreed to hear the case at issue in District Columbia versus Wesby is whether police had probable cause to arrest the partygoers for trespassing, and even if they didn't, whether they are entitled to qualified immunity because the law was not clearly established in this regard. Party at Joe's, the mechanics of house party invites were the subject of ample discussion during last week's oral arguments. Justice Breyer described his partying days as being back in the Middle Ages, but said he was aware that people had house parties in which invitations spread through word of mouth and not everyone knew the host. The people today, younger people, frequently say, hey, there's a party at Joe's house, and before you know it, 50 people go to Joe's house, and they don't really ask themselves, does Joe own the house or rent the house or something? It's Joe's house, but the normal assumption would be it's Joe's house, and somebody questions it. So what's the evidence here that's different from that? For several rounds of back and forth, D.C. Solicitor General Todd Kim, arguing on behalf of the city, continued to assert that it was different because in this case the host didn't have permission to throw a party there, provoking outbursts from Breyer. Kim eventually added that the home was sparsely furnished, that guests acted suspicious when talking to police, that they may have been smoking pot, and that there were hints of untoward sexual activity, such as used and unused condoms in an upstairs room. A readily available inference in a reasonable officer was that the partygoers were not blameless dupes tricked into someone else's house, but the simpler explanation, they were trespassing to throw a party with drugs and strippers in a place where they thought they wouldn't be caught, Kim told the court. The original police report stated that Officer Parker had found and field-tested marijuana at the party, but Parker later said this was a mistake and no drugs had been found. You can read the rest of that at reason.com, but it's one of those deals that you can't hold people like that liable. It definitely goes against their Fourth Amendment rights. And this is the police state. Because they literally hire people that don't understand the Constitution, don't know the intent, but they are highly taught on, these codes that they call laws and broad language, and not knowing the Constitution allows for the abridgment of your rights. It really does. And that seems to be an epidemic. Okay, I want to play a short clip here from We Are Change, U.S. Inches Towards Battle and Hollywood's Dark Secrets.
Welcome back, beautiful and amazing human beings, to the We Are Change Sunday recap show called What the Hell Really Happened, where we go over all the important news that happened this week. And of course, a lot of news this week revolves around the Las Vegas shooting. Hollywood being exposed. But this week, we actually get to come back to one of our niche topic, and that, of course, is the U.S. petrodollar foreign policy and war. Now, of course, don't worry, we're going to give you important updates about the Las Vegas shooting and Petalwood. But I think the most important story this week is how the U.S. government broke a deal with Iran while the same week making a deal with ISIS. Stay with me for a second as I explain what happened. This week, U.S. President Donald Trump took to the world stage and decertified the Iran nuclear deal. Now, if you don't know what the Iran nuclear deal was, it was a deal struck by Barack Obama and the Iranian government that significantly reduced their nuclear weapons capabilities in exchange for relieving and ending economic sanctions on the country that the United States imposed on them. Now, according to many independent government bodies and investigators, Iran was compliant with this deal and following the rules. But Donald Trump still went on the world stage and said, no, and decertified the deal that they had that they were compliant with because he said that Iran is destabilizing the Middle East, financing terrorists, and said something to the likes of making weapons of mass destruction, which I think now most Americans know is code word for, we're just going to lie to you, which they did. So with this decertification, now Congress has to decide whether the U.S. will remain in the deal or not. Donald Trump also levied new sanctions on Iran, which Iran responded by saying, if you put more sanctions on us, your regional military bases that surround our country would be at risk. Now, if you've been studying American foreign policy, you understand that an Iran war is a wet dream for the neoconservatives in this country. It's been planned and talked about decades ago. And of course, hacks on the left Democratic side and Republican side have been pushing for it. And with all of this news happening, even an ex-George W. Bush official is coming out and warning that Trump's latest action is itching for war and said, quote, if you think Iraq was a bad war, wait until you see Iran. He said, quote, I think we are doing the same thing as we did in 2003, and I was very intimate with the process in Iraq, and that we are marching down the road to war. Germany's foreign minister even came out and warned that Donald Trump's moves on Iran right now are increasing the risk of war. He said, quote, by doing that, he assured that the new agreement will fail ultimately, and then what you have is one choice, war. The end game is to provoke Iran enough so we can go to war. And yeah, I have to say from my analysis, the chances of war are becoming more likely. But honestly, we have to ask ourselves, who does this war actually serve? And I think Julian Assange of WikiLeaks put it best, saying that Israel has colonized Trump's foreign policy even more than Obama's, and that it's not America first, it's Israel's right-wing political party first, Saudi Arabia second. And we have to call a spade here because this aggression towards Iran works foremost in the benefit of Israel because Iran supports Hezbollah and now has a very important presence inside of Syria, right on Israel's border, at the end of this big Syrian conflict that's happening right now. And then second, Saudi Arabia, whose chief oil exporting competitor, who religiously they are at odds with and currently have a proxy war going on in Yemen, also benefits from a more aggressive U.S. policy towards Iran. And that reality, of course, you'll never hear on the U.S. mainstream media. And now with the Iran nuclear deal looking like it will expire, who did the United States cut a deal with this week? As the Washington Post unfairly reported that, quote, a deal was reached to evacuate civilians - local militants from ISIS-held Raqqa. I hope you're able to see what the Washington Post did here, because many people viewed Raqqa as the capital of ISIS. It's pretty clear ISIS previously controlled the entire area. So when you're talking about militants, quote, militants, you're really talking about ISIS that the United States just struck a deal with. Other people verify the validity of that claim, as even the AFP wrote that ISIS fighters are leaving Raqqa, but failed to mention that it was because of this U.S. brokered deal. And now the United States will bus out ISIS fighters out of the town of Raqqa to Deir Zor, where the Syrian government, along with Iranian and Russian forces, will meet them and have to fight them. Oh, gee whiz, yet another fact that the U.S. mainstream media establishment that is interconnected with government intelligence agencies does not want you to know. And in light of all of this, Iran actually responded to the United States by saying, stop worrying about us. Your government is about to collapse. And I do have to say, economically, the United States doesn't really look in a favorable position after these latest moves. As we saw, even China, France, Germany, Russia, and even the United Kingdom plea with Donald Trump to sustain this Iran nuclear deal. And with Donald Trump just saying, screw it, I'm just going to decertify them anyway, we're seeing very aggressive actions by China and Russia as they just announced and launched a yuan ruble payment system that, of course, will have a negative side effect to the U.S. petrodollar. China is even trying to compel and saying that they will compel Saudi Arabia to trade oil in yuan instead of the U.S. dollar. Very aggressive moves, which, of course, threaten the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency. As we know, China is economic partners with Iran, and they're very displeased by Donald Trump's latest moves, which only escalates the economic warfare that has been happening between China and the United States, which of course is leading many experts to predict the death of the U.S. petrodollar, which would end the U.S. dollar being the world reserve currency and of course create economic chaos within the United States. And if that wasn't enough for your plate, former presidential candidate and Congressman Ron Paul came out and said that the U.S. Federal Reserve's massive bubble is creating a world of economic pain domestically, which of course just creates new money and credit out of thin air. And what do you expect for a country that is in over $20 trillion debt in pursuit of a failing war on terror that is creating more terrorism, creating more pain and havoc around the world while trying to start new fights and new wars? Okay, so now moving forward in other authority figures lying to you news, we have the Las Vegas Police Department and FBI yet again changing the timeline of what happened during the Las Vegas mass shooting. This is the third time, if not more, that this happened, offering up a completely new timeline, contradicting themselves, looking like they have something to hide, and with the authorities still not even being able to keep their story straight of what exactly happened during the Las Vegas shooting. This is the main reason why people don't trust authorities. And to make the situation more confusing than it already is, one of the key witnesses that contradicted the authorities' timeline, Jesus Campos, the security guard and key witness in the Vegas shooting, disappeared as he was set to do 5 interviews, one which was supposed to be on Sean Hannity's show on Fox News, and even his union president said that they lost all contact to him and that currently his whereabouts are unknown. Meanwhile, we're getting more disinformation from the U.S. mainstream media about these events, as they claimed that this Las Vegas shooter was a successful gambler and has earned over $5 million in just gambling winnings. And independent media proved them totally wrong and estimated that he actually lost hundreds of thousands of dollars during his gambling sprees. And all we could say from this contradictory, confusing mess of a situation is that we'll keep you updated on this very important story. And now, of course, continuing on with more cover-up news, we, of course, have more critical information about the sexual abusing media mogul Harvey Weinstein. And we're finding out that it was Harvey Weinstein that actually paid for Bill Clinton's legal fees during his sex scandal, coming to his aid with donations to Bill Clinton's legal fund during the height of the Monica Lewinsky sex scandal. Of course, uncovering how sexual deviants are protecting each other. Also this week, famous actress Emma Thompson came out and said that Harvey Weinstein is not a sex addict, that he's a predator, a sexual predator, and far from the only one in Hollywood. Who, by the way, Hollywood was dropping hints about for over 30 years, as even Courtney Love in 2005 said,
"Do you have any advice for a young girl moving to Hollywood?"
I'll get lively with this. When Harvey Weinstein invites you to a private party and enforces you.
Being, of course, one of many Hollywood figures dropping hints about the behavior of Harvey Weinstein, and now with finally more celebrities speaking out, the dam is breaking on Hollywood's criminal, horrible behavior, as people like Kaya Jones, a former member of the Pussycat Dolls, came out and said that the truth that she wasn't in a girl group, she was in a prostitution ring that happened to sing and be famous while everyone who owned us made the money. Actress Rosie McGowan actually came out and said that she told the head of Jeff Bezos' studio that Harvey Weinstein previously raped her and that they did nothing about it. This is right after this actress was locked out of her Twitter account for some reason. And the cover-up is really indicative to a larger problem that's happening here, as celebrities, politicians, media organizations, and even local police departments are covering up these heinous acts that happen in Hollywood. Former famous child actor Corey Feldman came out and said
that we're the people that did this to both me and Corey that are still working, they're still out there, and they're some of the richest, most powerful people in this business.
And they are.
And they do not want me saying what I'm saying right now.
Are you saying that they're pedophiles?
Yes.
And that they're still in this business?
Yes.
That's what, and that's what you're saying in your book. When you talk to when you talk to
They don't want
parents,
me here right now. Trust
Corey,
me. They want me dead.
there are a lot of parents out here who want to put their kids in this business. Their kids are cute, they're great actors. Da, da, da. What would you say to a parent who just has the best of intentions, who's coming here with their child? If you're saying that there's a lot of predators in this industry.
It's a many-feathered bird, okay? Be careful what you wish for. That's what I'll tell you. You know, don't go into it with naivety. Don't go into it thinking that it's all roses and
You're
sunglasses.
damaging an entire industry.
Accusing Corey of damaging an entire industry is sick. This industry is clearly filled with sex abusers and pedophiles that are being covered up from the general public while lying to you about their illegal, deprived, horrible behavior. I mean, look into the minds of these sick human beings like Woody Allen, who he says that he hopes this whole Harvey Weinstein scandal doesn't spark a witch hunt. Speaking out to defend Harvey Weinstein now, saying that he feels bad for him. And this is a man who has been accused of sexual abuse himself, as his own adopted daughter detailed sexual abuse that he committed against her, where she claims she was sexually abused at the age of 7 by him. So in my book, we need a freaking witch hunt right now against these predators, sex abusers, pedophiles, against these powerful freaks that are being protected by news organizations, local police departments, celebrities, and other politicians. And the scary fact behind all of this is that powerful people were protecting Harvey Weinstein for over 30 years. And it's clear that there's more protected, untouched individuals in Hollywood who did and are doing worse things than Harvey Weinstein. It's pretty clear that the upper echelons of Hollywood are sick individuals, and they need to be cleansed with a good dose of truth and reality and justice for their crimes. Yeah, if you agree, share this video. Yeah, I'm pretty much at a loss for words at this point, so let me know what you think in the comment section below so we can continue this conversation. And of course, I wanted to thank everyone from the bottom of my heart for keeping this independent media operation alive by going to wearechange.org/donate and keeping us fully independent and
wearechange.org, We Are Change on YouTube, and check them out on YouTube. Now, I've covered, the Weinstein, and I really hope more gets exposed. I have seen a lot of social chatter about, Feldman, Corey Feldman, and, all these other stars that have spoken out, and, it seems that there's a big push to start exposing all these people, but what I also have seen is the ability of people to push the boundary of what to consider sexual harassment to a point, looking if you looked at a woman's butt, that could be sexual, right? Like, and it's always towards the woman. It's like, well, what's the, expectation of the woman looking at the men? But you start getting into a little bit crazy territory. I don't see it being pushed there, but that's why I say kind of watch out for witch hunts, how far you start pushing the limit of what's going to be called harassment. And that hashtag Me Too is also something that it seems to have, it's brought out legitimate stuff, but also kind of things that it's like, I'm not sure if I would call that harassment, or it's amazing what, people believe in anymore. It's, extremes of every viewpoint. I've been, told by some libertarians that I'm not libertarian enough because I believe we could go a constitutional route towards liberty It's a far cry from where we're at right now. You know, start shrinking government, and from there we could work on becoming even freer. Well, some may call me a sellout for that. You know, it's just one of those deals. But I think morals and stuff have changed. Also about the Vegas security guard, he did show up since that clip was recorded and posted. And Las Vegas guard Jesus Campos tells Ellen DeGeneres sorry, browser froze up. Okay. And this from Fox News channel, foxnews.com. The Maryland Bay security guard who briefly disappeared from public eye broke his silence on the Ellen DeGeneres show Wednesday, describing how he was wounded by the perpetrator of the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. Jesus Campos told DeGeneres in a pre-recorded interview that he had been called to the 32nd floor of the hotel on the night of October 1st to investigate an open-door alarm. He said he tried to access the floor through a stairwell next to gunman Stephen Paddock's hotel room, but was blocked by a bolted emergency exit door. There was a metal bracket holding the door in place, said Campos, who described it as just out of the ordinary. It's not normal. Campos said he reached the floor through another stairwell and inspected the metal bracket from the other side. As he walked back into the hallway from a room that leads to the stairwell, the door made a loud noise as it closed behind him. I believe that's what caught the shooter's attention, Campos said. As I was walking down, I heard rapid fire. At first I took cover. I felt a burning sensation. I went to go lift my pant leg up and I saw the blood. That's when I called it in on my radio that shots had been fired. I felt a burning sensation. That, that would be your first sign. We heard many people talk about, he didn't get shot. It's a made up story. I don't believe that. I heard conspiracy theories, and people are like, well, why did he show up on Ellen? And he wasn't registered security guard in Vegas. And I would just say a unregistered immigrant. That would be my guess. He told DeGeneres that he initially thought he was hearing jackhammers when the gunfire began. As an engineer, I thought, oh, sorry. This is Mandalay Bay engineer Stephen Shook, who went up to the 32nd floor to look at the door Campus had called about, told DeGeneres that he initially thought he was hearing jackhammers when the gunfire began. As an engineer, I thought, we are not working up here late at night. We wouldn't be doing that, said Shook, who added that the wounded Campus yelled at him, take cover, as bullets whizzed past his head. Within milliseconds, if he didn't say that, I would have got hit, the engineer said. Campus added that a woman poked her head out of her room to see what was going on, but he told her to go back inside. Campos had canceled several scheduled TV interviews last week, and his appearance Wednesday did nothing to quell rampant speculation and rumors surrounding the horrific attack. DeGeneres praised Campos for saving the life of Shook and the unidentified woman, and noted that her interview would be the only time the guard would discuss the shooting publicly. Nearly 3 weeks since Paddock killed 58 people and wounded more than 500 others, the FBI and Las Vegas police have not yet revealed a motive for the shooting, and questions remain about the timeline of events, which have become muddled after police and the owners of Mandalay Bay gave conflicting statements. Campos drew intense attention when police hailed him as a hero just after the shooting, saying he unwittingly stopped the massacre by arriving in the hallway. The police timeline changed dramatically a week later when authorities said Campos reported being wounded at 9:59, 6 minutes before people in the concert crowd reported shots. The timeline of the massacre changed again last Friday when Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo said Campos had been dispatched to 32nd floor at 9:59 p.m. and was wounded in the hallway less than a minute before the massacre started at 10:05. Shook's account of the DeGeneres interview seemed to support that chronology. He told Campos in the interview that the guard saved Shook's life, and DeGeneres credited Campos with also warning a woman who started to come out of her room to get back inside. Shortly after that is when Stephen Shook was approaching, and I told him to stay back and get cover, and that's when more rounds were dispersed, Campos said. His interview came after the last-minute cancellation of a scheduled live interview with Fox host Sean Hannity last Thursday, said David Hickey, president of the Security Police and Fire Professionals of America. Campos then dropped from public view, said Hickey, who had involved in booking the appearance. We are more than pleased that he's resurfaced and appears to be in good health, Hickey said. If he comes back as a security officer at Mandalay Bay, we'll see him again. If not, we wish him the best. I don't think we'll see him in the press anytime soon. A pre-recorded show too, kind of, it seems that he wants to hide. Almost like he's somewhat scared. And I almost wonder if part of it is, he's not in the country legally. That he was kind of a off-the-books type person. But, again, that's speculation. No proof of that. But it's really odd how everything happened. And it really just makes you question the whole timeline, everything. But, none of that really sidelines the Second Amendment. Through all this, when they start attacking the Second Amendment, nothing justifies it. The idea that laws will stop crazy people hell-bent on committing crimes, and that those laws will stop gun crimes, has all been proven fallacy. Some fantasy of some utopia. that will never exist. That's not human nature. You're going to have people that snap. Definitely in the culture where we try to group people and put them in these boxes and say operate within this box. I'm more creative than that box. So I'm more go-getter than being that guy that sits at a computer in the office. You can't force people to be a certain way. That's not human nature. And then the more you push to do that, that's when you start having these breaks. And whatever this motive was still does not, it doesn't justify taking lawful owners' guns away. And again, it doesn't take away from the crimes. And when any type of horrific event happens, if anybody's lost anybody, definitely people before their time, we understand the pain, the hurt. And there's nothing that's going to bring them back. And that emotional reaction that, oh, we can make laws that'll stop it from ever happening. Again, it's a emotional fallacy. And you have to look at facts. And the facts are, it has not stopped it in other countries. It won't stop it here. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Stay tuned here on UCY.TV. Great broadcast coming up right after this. And don't forget, go to UCY.TV. You can click the support tab and donate to UCY, or you can scroll down to the bottom, Amazon button down there. You click that. You can shop Amazon through UCY.TV, and you get the same great prices, same great shipping rate, and at the same time, UCY gets a little kickback to help cover operating costs. Really important that you help support alternative media. A lot of the sources for revenue for alternative media are drying up, and it's really important that you yourself support those media outlets that bring you information that mainstream never would. So, it's really, really important, and UCY has been, a network that's brought you many viewpoints and different ideologies and brought you the news that, again, mainstream don't want to talk about. And it's real important that we stick together to bring and expose that information. And don't forget, if you go to antityrannynews.com/MyPatriot, it takes you My Patriot Supply. Again, same great price, same great shipping rate. And we get a little kickback to help cover our operating costs. And again, it's really important to support it. Stay tuned again here on UCY.TV. Spam coming up after this. Thanks again. Hope you have a great week. See you Friday.